Have you ever felt a chill in the woods? That eerie sense you're being watched? Imagine a creature that embodies hunger so deep it can never be satisfied. A monster born from winter, famine, and human desperation. This is the Wendigo, one of North America's oldest and most terrifying legends. Today, we're exploring the entire history of the Wendigo, from its Algonquin origins to chilling real-life cases, and finally, how it evolved into a horror icon in movies, games, and internet culture. Grab a blanket, turn down the lights, and let's dive into the story of the Wendigo. The Wendigo legend comes from the Algonquin-speaking peoples of North America, including the Ojibwe, Cree, and Innu. These were cultures who lived in harsh northern climates, where brutal winters often meant hunger, starvation, and isolation. The Wendigo was more than a story. It was a warning. Described as a spirit of insatiable hunger, the Wendigo was said to appear when humans gave in to their darkest impulses, especially cannibalism during famine. In many tales, the Wendigo is impossibly tall and gaunt, with skin stretched over its bones, glowing eyes, and sometimes antlers like a twisted deer. Other stories describe it as a spirit that possesses humans, turning them into monsters consumed by greed and hunger. Think of it as the ultimate cautionary tale. Like how fairy tales warned kids about wandering into the woods, the Wendigo warned adults about what could happen when survival drove people to desperation. It wasn't just about eating human flesh. The Wendigo also symbolized greed, taking more than you need, hoarding food, and turning against your community. In a world where survival depended on sharing and cooperation, being selfish could be just as deadly as a monster in the woods. But the Wendigo wasn't just legend. Historical accounts suggest that people truly believed in Wendigo possession, so much so that entire communities were shaken by fear. One of the most infamous cases comes from the 19th century. Swift Runner, a Cree man in Canada. During the winter of 1878, Swift Runner and his family were trapped by snow and ran out of food. Desperate, being only 25 miles from a Hudson's Bay trading post, Swift Runner murdered and cannibalized his wife and children. When he was later caught and confessed, he insisted he had been consumed by the spirit of the Wendigo. He was executed, but his story became one of the most infamous examples of so-called Wendigo psychosis. This term was used by early colonists and missionaries to describe a supposed mental illness where people believed they were turning into Wendigos and craved human flesh. Today, most psychologists debate whether Wendigo psychosis was real or just a cultural interpretation of extreme stress and starvation. Still, these stories were not rare. Jesuit missionaries in the 1600s recorded tales of the Wendigo, describing it as a creature that grew larger the more it ate. Always starving, never full. The fear was real enough that in some indigenous communities suspected Wendigos were hunted down and killed before they could harm others. The Wendigo wasn't just a story to scare children. It was a force woven into life, death, and survival in the wilderness. So what does the Wendigo really mean? Anthropologists see the Wendigo as a cultural symbol. On one level, it represents the dangers of cannibalism in times of famine. On another, it's a metaphor for unchecked greed. Even today, people use the phrase Wendigo economics to criticize consumerism, an economy that consumes endlessly, never satisfied, devouring the world around it. Psychologists, meanwhile, look at Wendigo psychosis as a cultural expression of mental illness. In communities where the Wendigo was deeply believed in, fear and stress could manifest as people genuinely thinking they were transforming into the monster. And then there's the spiritual angle. In indigenous teachings, the Wendigo can also be seen as a lesson about balance. Humans who take more than they need, whether food, power, or wealth, risk becoming consumed by the Wendigo spirit. In other words, the Wendigo is a reflection of us. Our greed, our hunger, our darkest impulses. By the 20th century, the Wendigo moved from folklore into pop culture, and it became scarier than ever. In 1910, the Canadian writer Algernon Blackwood published a horror story simply called The Wendigo, which cemented the creature as a figure of supernatural terror. Since then, the Wendigo has appeared in comics, movies, video games, and TV shows. In Marvel Comics, the Wendigo is a white-furred beast cursed by cannibalism. In Stephen King's Pet Sematary, the burial ground is linked to a Wendigo spirit. Horror games like Until Dawn feature Wendigos as terrifying, emaciated monsters stalking players in the mountains. And of course, shows like Supernatural and Teen Wolf brought the Wendigo into the modern monster pantheon. Pop culture often emphasizes the Wendigo's monstrous appearance, deer skulls, antlers, glowing eyes, even though these features weren't part of most original indigenous stories. It's a fascinating example of folklore evolving, shifting from a cultural warning about greed and survival into a worldwide horror icon. The Wendigo has endured for centuries because it speaks to something universal. It's not just a monster in the woods. It's hunger that cannot be satisfied. It's greed that devours everything in its path. It's what happens when desperation, selfishness, or obsession consume us. From the frozen forests of Algonquin legend to Hollywood horror, the Wendigo continues to haunt our imaginations, because deep down, it represents something we all fear in ourselves. So next time you're walking in the woods on a cold winter night and you hear branches snap in the distance, ask yourself, is it the wind, an animal, or something much hungrier? That is the entire history of the Wendigo.